I'm Errol Barnett. We appreciate you joining us. 24 years ago, 19 terrorists hijacked 4 planes, deliberately crashing 2 of them into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, one into the Pentagon and one into an empty field in Pennsylvania after passengers overtook the hijacker. Almost 3,000 people were killed. CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand joins us from the White House with more on how the U.S. is marking this historic day. Natalie, good morning to you once again. Tell us how President Trump is commemorating 9/11 this morning.
Hi, Errol. President Trump and the First Lady just exited the White House about a couple minutes ago and got into a motorcade headed to the Pentagon, where one of the remembrance ceremonies will take place in just a short time from now. Of course, 125 people who worked at the Pentagon were killed that day, along with 59 people on the plane that crashed into the west side of the building. Earlier this morning, just before 7, a large American flag was unfurled from the Pentagon, and the Pentagon's X account shows that the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, and other top Pentagon officials were there to mark that moment, the beginning of these remembrance ceremonies. Other administration officials posting tributes on X, saying that 24 years later, America will never forget this day, the nearly 3,000 lives lost. FBI Director Kash Patel also reflected on the public law enforcement officials and public safety officials in the wake of the tragedy that rushed to respond, and said, as we reflect on that day and remember the lives lost, including the too many 9/11 related deaths the FBI has had since that horrific day, let us honor those who courageously stood guard, ran toward danger, and put everything on the line to defend America in her darkest hour. Their sacrifices will never be forgotten, Errol.
Natalie, thank you for that. As you've been speaking, we're looking now at live pictures coming to us on the right of our screen from the Pentagon, where President Trump and the First Lady are taking part in memorial ceremonies. And on the left, it's the scene at the memorial here in New York City as they unfurl a flag there and prepare for the national anthem.
So proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleam, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming.
Listening there to the national anthem, a bell signifying the first moment a plane struck the North Tower at 8:46 a.m. back on September 11th, 2001. And now listening to bagpipers and drummers exit the stage as they represent the NYPD, the fire department, and other first responders who sacrificed their lives that day and in the years that followed. I want to bring in Doug Brinkley now. He's the Catherine Sanoff Brown Chair in Humanities and History Professor at Rice University. He's also a presidential historian. Doug, what should we all be thinking about 24 years later? Is this about the unfinished business of bringing the perpetrators to justice? Is it about the sacrifice of a country that went to war after this? Or is it about national unity at a time of incredible pain?
To me, it represents national unity. If we go back, and people like myself of a certain age, this was one of the most frightening days of our lives. We were watching in real time the planes hit the World Trade Center and hit the Pentagon, the whole story about what happened in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and the bravery of the passengers to make sure that plane didn't go into our U.S. Capitol. So it was a day of heroes amongst all the carnage. And I remember how spontaneously all Americans started putting American flags on their front lawns or wearing an American pin. George W. Bush had to avoid Washington briefly. He had read My Pet Goat down in Florida. He got word of this after talking to children in Florida, and he went to get to some safe quarters in Louisiana, then Iowa, eventually to the White House, and then addressed the nation. And we were at war. We didn't know what was happening. Anthrax packages were coming. We could have been a nation of fear. But by the time President George W. Bush got to the site of the Twin Towers, and he wrapped his arm around one of the firemen with a megaphone and said, I hear you, and whoever did this is going to be hearing from us soon, and then went to Yankee Stadium and threw a pitch in front of a crowd. There was a feeling of the U.S. pulled together in an unprecedented way. And of course, out of that emerged our twin wars going into Afghanistan and going into Iraq. We did not get the perpetrator, Osama bin Laden. We didn't for a while. Eventually, when President Barack Obama was in present, you had Operation Neptune Spear, and bin Laden was captured and killed, and it kind of brought a closure to that era of al-Qaeda terror directed at the United States.
Everyone who was alive at this time remembers where they were when the second plane struck the tower. The first tower was struck at about 8:46. That pinned all sorts of live news coverage to the towers, and many of us watched in real time the second tower be hit with an aircraft full of people. I remember being in Los Angeles as a reporter at the time, and afterward, because no planes were allowed to fly and the airspace was locked, the smog in LA started to clear. So there was this national sense of unity amid that real sense of horror and fear, which then gave way to all sorts of aspects about what to do next. As you just pointed out, this also led to the modern war on terror, the development of the Department of Homeland Security, all the security protocols that still persist to this day. What is the legacy of 9/11, especially when you consider that despite Osama bin Laden being killed, the mastermind behind 9/11, the people being put on trial, have still not yet had their cases finalized? It's still working its way through the system.
Well, what we had to direct our attentions to as a nation is stateless terrorism. That was the big phrase back then. Al-Qaeda had no real home, a state. They were intrepid and living all sorts of different places. Fact of the matter is, we had to kill Osama bin Laden in Pakistan, one of our supposed allies. So it was a lot of dangerous footwork going on. I think there became a new appreciation for the firemen and the policemen, looking at their true heroism. Books would be written about them. Recently, there's a feeling they haven't gotten proper medical attention from that day, and the comedian Jon Stewart and others have forced Congress to address this, that we have to make sure we take care of the families of the stricken that day, particularly police and fire, who were our first responders. There's a feeling, when you mentioned Homeland Security Department by George W. Bush, one of the big things was no more airplane attacks. That's why we all go through such a procedure to get through security at an airport. Sometimes you feel you're taking everything you have off and putting it in a bin can be inconvenient, but it's work. We don't have any more of these kind of using airplanes as weapons again. But there's still mysteries to the 9/11 tragedy. The commission report is very well written. I was on the board of the National Book Foundation. We even nominated it for a book award because it was so well written. But there's still questions. Some people are wondering about how a third building was able to just come down on 9/11 in New York, building number 7. You know, what happened there? And then there's questions, so were these Saudis? And if they are Saudis, why aren't we punishing Saudi Arabia for 9/11? And we live in a nation now where of social media and conspiracy theories, and 9/11 is a hot button topic. There's a feeling that we don't know all that happened that day. But I would look at it as the miracle of America. When you go to New York City now, I miss the Twin Towers, something taken and lost, but we've built such an incredible memorial, and I urge people to go there in New York, and it's very moving, recounting that day at the exact spot. And I think only in America do you build a monument this beautiful at the exact spot in such a quick fashion.
And Doug, I just want to make sure our viewers are aware, as we listen to relatives of victims from the 9/11 attacks read the names of those thousands of people lost that day, that in a few minutes at the top of the hour, we expect to get an update on a separate tragedy, the shooting death of conservative activist Charlie Kirk out of Utah. We expect to get that in about 5 minutes, and we'll break away to that for our viewers when it takes place. But Doug, to kind of connect the two stories, today we are in a moment of what seems to be increased political violence toward activists, judges, people in elected office. After 9/11, there was a look to blame someone and something. Is there anything learned in the wake of 9/11, you know, as we speak about a day of unity for the country, that should be remembered at a time of increased fear out there for so many people?
I believe that whether you're a Democrat or Republican, it's a time to get behind the American flag, to let people know that you love this country. We are going through a hard time. We're also the envy of the world as a economic and research and development nation, and our armed forces are topmost, the number one really in the world. So we have a lot going well. But 9/11 did create a sense of America being a kingdom of fear. We now we're afraid of things that were going to happen, that we started sensing our soft targets. Is anybody really protecting with security the shopping mall or the Little League game or, you know, a funeral? And that can create a kind of national psychosis, because if you're living with fear, every place can look like a potential target. And so it's an age now we need of increased security. Charlie Kirk was not a U.S. senator, wasn't a judge. He was an activist, and he drew a big crowd. But obviously, there wasn't enough security there to protect him. And as we go forward, I think when these hot button lecturers go to universities, it's going to fall upon the state and university and the federal government to make sure that they have proper security, including on rooftops if you're going to be in an outdoor amphitheater.
Doug Brinkley, stand by for us as we watch the images out of Lower Manhattan. We want to jump over to the Pentagon. President Trump is there taking part in memorial services. Our CBS News senior national security correspondent, Charlie D'Agata, is there as well. Charlie, tell us what you're seeing and hearing this morning, just minutes before we expect this 9 a.m. press update on the Charlie Kirk killing.
Yeah, well, Errol, I've just run back in here because the camera positions are restricted outside, but and I was actually it took me a while to get in. Enhanced security at the Pentagon is next level enhanced security, but the president has arrived here for an observance event, or he should be arriving if he's not already arrived.
Yeah, we just laid eyes on the president. Yeah, he's arrived.
Okay, great. I'm not able to see that. So yes, you know, this of course is the place where 184 people lost their lives on the morning of 9/11 at 9:37 when the plane crashed into the Pentagon. And you know, it's never lost on me personally. I make sure that I go out to the 9/11 memorial area. There are a number of benches. And it's really moving and really touching because the benches are set up in terms of the year of birth of the individuals who died. So if it was 1966, there were, you know, 14 benches there. And it goes all the way down to a 10-year-old and all the way up to somebody in their late 70s. And it's moving because it's exactly where the aircraft came in. And it was flying extremely low before it hit the Pentagon. I mean, it trimmed a hotel, a nearby hotel, and it's moving for the people in this building because they're individuals that I meet, and I was shipped out immediately toward Afghanistan, you know, the next day after 9/11. So it's close to my heart, but it's also close to the people who work in this building. There are a lot of young people, a lot of people who decided because of 9/11 to join the military, and they've been in conflict pretty much ever since in one way or another, either planning or because of what happened in 9/11 in Afghanistan and later in Iraq. So this is very much a living thing here. And you can feel it, you can sense it today. This can be a very serious building at the best of times, but it feels very solemn today considering what's going on.
Yeah, I wasn't aware about those benches, but that's a really important detail when you remember the range of lives lost and the various people who were impacted that day and their families and relatives who still live with the pain. If our viewers are just joining us, we're watching 9/11 memorial services both here in New York City and at the Pentagon, where President Trump arrived a short time ago with First Lady Melania Trump. They are scheduled to lay a wreath there. We're speaking with our Charlie D'Agata, who is at the Pentagon, where, as you might imagine, security is heightened. On the left of your screen, you're looking at relatives of the victims. More than 3,000 people, innocent people, lost their lives that day 24 years ago. And each year, their names are read by people who they are survived by. We are also standing by for updates on the day's other big story. The FBI and the Utah Department of Public Safety will be holding a news conference momentarily to bring us an update on the investigation into the shooting death of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. I'm Errol Barnett at the CBS Broadcast Center here in New York City, and we also have historian Doug Brinkley with us to put all of this into context as the nation marks one of its most horrific days amid a time of heightened political fear, amid what appeared to be an increase in political attacks. Doug, if you can still hear me, tell me what your thoughts are as we witness what will be the president taking part in these events and what this means for the Trump administration.
Well, it's an important anniversary for any president to pay attention to. I mean, we only have a few in history. The day John F. Kennedy died, D-Day, Pearl Harbor, 9/11 are these days of that you almost have to be a mourner in chief and lay wreaths on soldiers. It's interesting, President Trump is staying in Washington and taking control over the services at the Pentagon. Just this week, he renamed the Department of Defense the War Department because he feels 9/11, maybe we were too much like sitting ducks, that we weren't aggressive. On the other hand, on the campaign trail, when he would run 2 times for president, Donald Trump would talk about the mistakes of forever wars, meaning our ultimate response to 9/11, Iraq and Afghanistan, not feeling we got enough out of it in the United States. But he today is honoring the martyrs, the people who died in service on that horrible day. We're heading into America 250 or 250th birthday. And I'm sure you're going to see in his garden of heroes that he's talking about building of statues, most likely in South Dakota, you will see somebody, I think Todd Beamer,
And Doug, excuse
as a statue.
excuse my gentle interruption here, because the president has now arrived and we are expecting to have the second moment of silence marking the second plane strike.
Gary Eugene Bird. Joshua.
And this is now the resumption of names of victims being read by their relatives there in Lower Manhattan at the memorial. On the right of your screen, we continue to see President Trump with the First Lady as they lay a wreath at the 9/11 memorial at the Pentagon. Historian Doug, let's listen here. We've got the national anthem at the Pentagon now. All right, Doug Brinkley, if you're still with us, you were speaking about, before I gently interrupted you, that at a moment like this, any president has to be the mourner-in-chief. What is the importance of the presidential role on a day like today?
If you lost a loved one in 9/11, you really want your president to be there and be very somber, make sure that you show up, lay a wreath, listen, talk to some soldiers, give the day an overcast of dignity, because nobody deserved to lose their lives that day. And the stories of people trying to save other people's lives are really an extraordinary thing. In New York City at the Twin Towers, somebody took a white oak tree acorn, and you just take the acorn from a tree that survived. And I recently saw that tree now growing in Towanda, Illinois, at like a special arboretum, meaning people took from that tree the acorn to show that we're going to continue to grow using the surviving tree of Lower Manhattan as a symbol for peace and growth, and that of the changing of the times and the seasons, and a sense of remembrance to the fallen heroes of that day long ago.
As we continue to watch this split screen of memorial services in New York City and at the Pentagon, we should also note there are events underway in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, which was the third location where a plane struck in an open field after passengers on it overtook the hijacker. But one of the things that stands out to me, Doug, as we talk about this, and also we're standing by for a press update on the shooting of conservative activist Charlie Kirk, which we expect at any moment, so that could happen with short warning. But as we think about what to remember, we had a story on the CBS Morning News today from our Nicole Skanger about teachers who are having the responsibility of teaching a third of Americans who weren't alive back in 2001. What is the key lesson? Because there were, as you've noted, some negative aspects after 9/11, whether it was the targeting of Muslim Americans or the treatment of first responders who didn't get the aid they needed, as well as those who lived in Lower Manhattan and suffered for it from chemical issues, from the debris. What for you is the important piece to teach younger people who weren't alive and don't remember this?
Well, for starters, they need to be reminded that in America, we take care of our own. And we need to make sure forever that we take care of the men and women who survived the 9/11 tragedy, who now may be having problems from the debris, from toxic releases, environmental health issues, cancer spikes. We have to make sure that they get proper medical care. Secondarily, you're right. This is a long time ago. I'm teaching a class right now at Rice University, and the other day I asked my students about 9/11, and I forgot that none of them were alive. None of them were alive, and today's college kids, so to speak, weren't alive when George W. Bush was president. They have no memory of 9/11. It's an ancient event to them. So you have to teach it new. And I think we should be continuing to collect oral histories of people who saw what happened there, or somebody who took footage of the event from a different perspective, or some of the outpouring of love as demonstrated by people making quilts or writing letters, that can be collected now at our National 9/11 Museum in New York and elsewhere, that we make sure it's always a day we keep focus on, because we were hit hard, yet we transcended it. And the real lesson has to be, when you hit America, we'll hit back and we'll build back. And I think we've done both of those. The only piece we're missing is we've got to take better care of the people whose health was unduly affected on that horrible September 11th, 2001.
That is an important point to end on. Presidential historian Doug Brinkley, wonderful to have your insight and perspective for us on this solemn day. I want to jump over now to our Natalie Brand, correspondent at the White House, as we watch President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump at the Pentagon take part in memorial services there. Natalie, what is on the president's schedule today? What do we expect from him?
Well, you can see them right there on stage, seated for now, taking part in this remembrance ceremony at the Pentagon. Later this afternoon, the president is scheduled to travel to New York to take part or watch a Yankees game. And New York is also where the vice president, J.D. Vance, was supposed to go to Ground Zero to mark this somber day. But we learned just this morning that the vice president and second lady instead will travel to Salt Lake City, Utah, to meet with the family of Charlie Kirk following that political assassination, terrible situation that happened less than 24 hours ago. But Errol, as you've been talking about, these remembrance ceremonies have been taking part in all locations where the planes struck the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and also went down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And that's where we've learned that the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Doug Collins, is expected to be at that remembrance ceremony. And just to build on something that you've been speaking with Doug and Charlie about, just to think of the sacrifice since 9/11, 24 years ago. My generation, either about to graduate high school or in college at that time, so many of people I know chose to enter the military, serve the country in some way, in some form of a national security position because of the events of 9/11 and they felt called to serve. That day is just one that none of us can ever forget, obviously.
Such an important point, Natalie. People who witnessed this at a young age chose to give their lives and sacrifice in order to protect the United States and what it stands for and what it represents.